Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? It's your boy, The Doc, and we are back for another Dynasty Headliners video. If you popped in last week, you know we talked about 5 running backs that you should be trading away in Dynasty. And this week, we're talking about 5 running backs that you should be trading for right now. Let's jump into it. Before we jump into the actual players, let's look for what we are actually looking for when it comes to running backs that we should be trading for in Dynasty. And the first point we need to emphasize is the fact that age still matters when it comes to running backs specifically. We talked about it a little bit in last week's video for guys we're trading away, but 91% of RB1 seasons are by players between the ages of 21 and 28. Age is a huge factor when it comes to running back production, and we want to focus on guys that still have enough room left in the tank to produce RB1 seasons. Now, 2/3 of the running back seasons where players scored over 250 PPR points since 2000 were players between the ages of 23 and 26. Now, this means that running backs typically peak during that specific age range, and less than 5% of the running backs that we saw in that data set from 2000 had their best season after the age of 29. So we definitely don't want to be getting any aging running backs on our Dynasty rosters, specifically in trade. Now, the other thing we need to know about when it comes to running back production is that when running backs start to trend down, they tend to keep trending down. So that decline is something that we're looking for when it comes to trading for running backs. We don't want to be trading for somebody that's already on the downswing. Only 1/3 of the running backs who experienced 2 years of declining performance before the age of 26 managed to bounce back at a high level of production. And of that 1/3 of the players, only half of them were first round picks. So we're really looking for guys, if they've had 2 down years, that have significant draft capital. And over 70% of those running backs that are able to bounce back are actually top 10 picks. So we see a huge correlation between running backs that are able to overcome down years and draft capital. We just know teams that draft running backs highly are going to give them a longer leash to be bad in terms of opportunities. Guys that don't have that draft capital are probably going to be replaced relatively soon. We don't want to be looking for any running backs that are going to be replaced in a very strong draft class coming up this year. So what are we looking for specifically? Ideally, when you're trading for running backs, you want somebody under the age of 26 that has had less than 2 bad years or down seasons compared to their normal peak production. And ideally, we want someone who was drafted highly in the NFL draft because they have a longer shelf life in terms of opportunity. First running back that we're going to be talking about today is Breece Hall. Now, I think it's important here to distinguish the difference between a down season compared to what you're averaging in a disappointing season. I think in terms of production versus very high expectations, Breece Hall may have had a disappointing season for some people. If you thought he was going to be the RB1 or the RB2, you were probably disappointed. Finished as the RB16, but was only 1 touchdown away with over 240 PPR points from being an RB1 on the year. So it's not like he was that far off from a top 12 season. Now, Breece Hall is still one of the youngest starting running backs in the NFL. He just entered that prime 23 to 26 age range where he should be scoring the majority of his fantasy points of his career. And I know there's still a lot of questions regarding the situation with Hall right now. We at least know who his head coach is going to be, having the Jets already signed Aaron Glenn, but the real question is, who's his quarterback going to be next season? If I'm looking to capitalize on the talent of Hall, I'm going to use those question marks as a trade chip and a conversation starter for whoever has Hall as a way to potentially acquire him. It's not going to be cheap. I'm not saying you're going to try to bid low on a guy like Breece Hall, but just know that he still is in his prime from a fantasy scoring perspective, and he's still someone you should be actively trying to trade for, especially if you're competing for fantasy championships this year or next year. The next running back on this list is Kenneth Walker III. Now, You could argue, based on the success that he had as a rookie, that Walker has technically had 2 down seasons in his career. And while he hasn't hit the highs of that initial rookie campaign, can't downplay the fact that Zach Charbonnet entered the picture last year and is taking some of that workload away from Kenneth Walker. Combined with injuries, it's not surprising that he's coming off his worst year as a pro. He had career lows in rushing yards, touchdowns, yards per attempt, and total touches this year. Things are looking a little bleak if you've got Kenneth Walker on your dynasty roster, but the good news is if you're trading for him, that could present an opportunity to get him at a cheaper price. Now, he's only 24 years old, should still have plenty of suitors when he becomes a free agent after this season. And I think that there's some potential here for him to have a breakout year, even though he had a down year. Now, the reason I say that is that he actually set career best in terms of targets, receptions, and receiving yards in 2024. And he has steadily improved his catch percentage over the last 3 years. Coming out of college, we knew that pass catching was not his strong suit. So seeing him improve in that area each and every season is encouraging for the fact that he may be developing a 3-down skill set. And we're starting to see the Seahawks use him in all 3 downs. Now, I'm buying any running back that I can find that's 24 years old, has a bell cow skill set, and he could potentially have a new place to play in after this season. So even though there's some competition right now, next year he might have a backfield all to himself. There's a lot of evidence that he's becoming a more well-rounded running back, and that's a good thing when you're talking about guys that you should be looking for and you can pick up a little bit cheap based on some down seasons this year and last year. I think either way, there's a good chance he will have more opportunity either in Seattle or elsewhere and could literally and figuratively run with it. Before we get into our last few running backs in this video, I want to thank our friends over at SeatGeek for sponsoring today's video. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, I've been keeping a little secret from my wife. I'm thinking about taking her to a show, and I've been looking at the tickets over on SeatGeek. The thing I love about the SeatGeek app is that they've got over 70,000 events on the app right now. So you can look at literally anything that you could buy a ticket for on this app and compare and contrast prices right there in one app. And the thing I really enjoy when I'm scrolling through tickets on SeatGeek is that they actually rate every seat from 1 to 10. So you're guaranteed to know how good of a seat you are buying. It's the only ticketing app that will do that for you. And when you use the code Headliners, you can get $20 off your first set of tickets over at SeatGeek. Again, make sure you use the code Headliners when you order and get $20 off your first set of tickets at SeatGeek. All right, now that we've talked about a running back that had his worst season thus far in 2024, let's talk about another guy that had his best season last year, and that's Chuba Hubbard. Now, last year, I was all in on Chuba Hubbard because I was all out on the idea that Jonathan Brooks was going to be able to come back from an ACL tear and produce right away. And here we are just a few months later, and we're actually in the exact same position that we were last summer, with Jonathan Brooks dealing with a re-tear of his ACL, going through another long recovery process, and Chuba Hubbard in line to potentially start again for the Carolina Panthers. Now, Panthers got their mojo going later in the season. Looks like Bryce Young got a little bit more swagger. I don't think there's any way that the team is considerably worse next year. And the good news is that they've already invested quite a bit into this running back room. Chuba Hubbard got a contract extension before Jonathan Brooks got re-injured. They spent a second-round pick on Brooks. So I don't think that the team's going to be looking to spend a lot of money or free agent or draft capital on a running back replacement for Jonathan Brooks. If they do, it's going to be a later round pick, somebody that's not really threatening the workload of Chuba Hubbard heading into 2025. And that's a good thing if you're looking to acquire him in Dynasty, because even though he had a very productive season, finishing as the RB14 last year, a lot of guys are not putting much respect on Chuba Hubbard's name. He plays for a bad team. And I think in general, his value is significantly depressed based on what he's actually producing on the field, which makes him more acquirable in Dynasty. And it's somebody that if you're only looking for a running back to fill in as your RB2 throughout the season, maybe you're right on the edge of being able to compete for a Dynasty championship, Chuba Hubbard is a guy that I'm looking to acquire on the cheap. I don't think it's going to cost you much more than a decent second-round pick, maybe a young player that hasn't really produced much in his first year or two, and I think you could get a very solid piece to put into your lineup each and every week with Chuba Hubbard. I don't think that he has the same upside as some of the guys on this list in terms of being a top 5 or even a top 8 running back. But if you're just looking for a very solid role player for your team, somebody that you can slide in each and every week and get 10 to 20 points, sometimes even a bigger week in your RB2 spot or in a flex spot, you could do a lot worse than Chuba Hubbard. He's definitely somebody I'm looking to acquire right now. The next guy we need to talk about is over in Cincinnati, and that is Chase Brown. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, I'm a little bit biased. I'm from Illinois, and I saw Chase Brown play at Illinois, and I always thought that he had the makeup of a guy that could be a true 3-down back in the NFL. We actually saw that in 2024. He had a very impressive season after sitting most of his rookie year behind Joe Mixon. Finished as the RB10 overall. Impressive usage both in the passing game and running game. Accounted for over 1,300 total yards of offense, and he really truly became a 3-down back for the Bengals. Now, the thing I like about Brown in terms of his dynasty value is I don't think his situation is really going to change much. He's a very cheap running back. He's a very cheap starting option, given the fact that they only spent a 5th-round pick on him just 2 years ago. So they've got him on that rookie pay scale. He's very cheap, and the team, they need some cheap players on this team because they are going to struggle to sign their big-name free agents this offseason. They're already a little bit cash hungry, and I don't think that they're going to be looking to add a bunch to this running back room. I think it's very likely that they're going to keep Chase Brown as the main bell cow for the foreseeable future. And that's ideal for you because he's still in his just age 24 season, and he's got more meat on the bones. We saw what he could do at Illinois. He can handle a huge workload if he's given the opportunity to. And I know that right now it might feel like you're doing a bit of an overpay to try to trade for him in Dynasty, given the fact that he's coming off a great year. But if you can lock up 275 plus touches for a running back at this day and age, you have to be willing to pay the price to get that type of locked in volume as your RB1 or RB2. Chase Brown seems like a no-brainer as to somebody you need to be picking up on that Dynasty squad. The last guy I want to talk about today is Jonathan Taylor. Now, remember at the beginning of the video when I said that most players, when they have 2 years of declining production prior to age 26, never bounce back? Jonathan Taylor is one of the rare exceptions. Now, while recurrent ankle injuries have plagued him over the last 3 years, it's hard to argue that when he's healthy, he's not one of the 5 best running backs in the NFL. Sure, you're going to miss him for a few games here or there, most likely, but when you have a guy that can single-handedly take you through a playoff run in fantasy, you have to be willing to at least entertain the idea of trading for him. He's still arguably got 2+, maybe even more good years left in him, and I think that there's a good chance that this team will continue to improve over the next year or two as they build the team around this rushing attack. Now, Taylor's coming off a pretty good season. He had over 100 rushing yards a game, set a career high in rushing attempts per game. And while you can't guarantee that he's not going to have any competition with Anthony Richardson, it's at least proven that he can carry a workload with Richardson in at quarterback. Now, if you can get a running back like Jonathan Taylor and you find him on a team in your dynasty league that is maybe rebuilding or is not competing right now, I am aggressively targeting Jonathan Taylor, and I'm using the pitch that he's going into his late 20s. He's most likely seen the very peak of his powers earlier in his career, and you can use that historical decline as a way to pitch trading for him to a player that maybe just doesn't have him in the same timeline for their team specifically. He's definitely a guy you're probably going to pay up for, but again, we're looking for difference makers when it comes to the running back position, and Jonathan Taylor may be the most impressive player in terms of production that you can still easily acquire for a reasonable cost in Dynasty right now. All right, that's all I got for you guys this week. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you leave a like, comment on the video. Let me know, who are you trying to acquire in Dynasty this offseason? There's lots of great names out there. If there's anybody I missed that you feel like fits the criteria, let's start a conversation about them down below. But that's all I got for you guys this week. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headline Nation, we running the game.